Hey everybody, Mr. The Fanboy here. This is my salute of two of my all-time favorite martial arts and combat sports, and that is shoot fighting, shoot the ancient style of shoot fighting, and its successor, mixed martial arts. Of course, I'm gonna start off with shoot fighting. Before I get to shoot fighting, I'm going to give a brief history on both of these styles. Both of these styles were pretty much developed, were pretty much hybrid arts, were pretty much hybrid arts that were developed, that were originally developed to see what the best styles were, but it really turned out there is no best style. It's all about cross training. It's all about cross training, and both of these styles were known for mixing striking and grappling. Both of these styles are also known for being, especially the shoot fighting, for being the realistic form of professional wrestling. How professional wrestling would look if it was real. I'm gonna start off with, like I said, I'm gonna start off with the shoot fighting. Shoot fighting. Of course, shoot fighting emerged in Japan in the 80s with Nibuhiko Takeda's his UWF International promotion. This promotion was very different from other professional wrestling promotions at the time. This promotion, first of all, had a very different fighting style, while all the other wrestling promotions at that time, New Japan and the rest of them, were pretty much strong style, which is pretty much the same as American wrestling here in America, only with stronger strikes and lots of martial arts and submissions. Lots of martial arts and submissions. Oh, shoot fighting, of course, was open palm strikes mixed with technical catch as can judo sambo type grappling grappling or wrestling with deadly martial arts kicks and chops inspired by karate and Muay Thai kickboxing. Um, the attire was freewear, even though most of the fighters wore what I like to call the shoot fighting look, the speedos, the singlets, the knee pads, and the kick pads over their mat mat shoes. Even though for some it different, Vader wore his traditional costume, who wrestled there, and another fighter named Koji Katayo. Koji Katayo, who I know is Kim Chi from WCW versus the World, wore wore a sleeveless martial arts gi, more sleeveless martial arts gi. Um, these bouts were made. These bouts were made to look real. These bouts were made to look real, and they were supposed to be an alternative to the more gimmicky side of professional wrestling. But this was gimmicky too, and it was no more real than New Japan or any of those were. But just like New Japan Pro Wrestling, the martial arts and the techniques were real, and all the bouts, most of the bouts were highly exciting. Some of the greatest fighters included Nibuhiko Takeda, Victor Zangief, who would later become the inspiration of Victor Zangief from the Street Fighter series, and the late Bad News Allen also appeared in this promotion. So did Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock, Ken Shamrock, and of course, this is the promotion that produced Kazushi Sakuraba, one of the greatest MMA fighters of all, who would later go on to become the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Of course, then there were rival promotions like the Pro Wrestling Fujinari, which had professional wrestler and MMA fighter Bart Vell as their top guy. This guy was known for his mullet style and his flag Rocky style trunks with blue kick pads. Then of course you had also in this same promotion Jerry Flynn, professional wrestler here in America. Jerry Flynn made several appearances in this promotion where he was considered well received. And then of course you had the Rings organization, which would later become an MMA organization. Rings organization. This is then of course you had Nexus. You had what is probably my favorite of the group because these were real. You had the Pancrase We Are Hybrid Wrestlers organization, which was this was the actual first real form of professional wrestling and while being the same as the shoot fighting organizations of the 80s like the UWF, the Rings organization, and the Pro Wrestling Fujinari pro, professional wrestling organizations. This one looked even more. This one looked even more realistic than the shoot style promotions. Even though there were some work fights, but most of the fights were real, and fighters like Bas Rutten, Ken Shamrock, Ken Shamrock, Ken Shamrock, and Maurice Smith started out in this organization, and they would take the skills they learned here and go on to the UFC and become UFC heavyweight champions. This style of shoot fighting is often mocked at because it's not bare knuckle, but bouts were highly more scientific, highly more technical than the brawls seen in MMA, and these so-called fake techniques took several fighters like Shamrock, Rutan, and Maurice Smith to championship gold, and fighters like Kazushi Sakuraba to mainstream success in organizations like Pride. Pride. It's a shame it's not around anymore. I wish they have a modified version of this, only with only mixed with MMA, only mixed with MMA now. But this style of fighting is not popular anymore due to the rising popularity of mixed martial arts, which I'm about to get to in a minute now. Now MMA, of course, MMA has a long and rich history. It actually started a long time ago. It was a gladiator competition that combined wrestling and boxing techniques, and competition usually ended in death. And then of course the earlier forms of boxing, which was prize fighting, which wasn't even boxing. It was punching and wrestling techniques before they regulated and made professional boxing in the 1700s. Then of course you had several underground hybrid techniques used to train soldiers. But I think MMA, there was an MMA tournament here in the United States in Pennsylvania, but it got banned. And then of course you had the Gracies with their Jiu-Jitsu challenge in the Valley Tudo tournaments, which was brought here as the UFC. And that's how MMA got started here in the early UFC. It was awesome with no rules. And I loved how one thing I hate about today's UFC, and one thing I love about the old UFC was I love how the attire the fighters wore was more freestyle, making it look similar to Bloodsport and Street Fighter. That's also another thing I loved about the shoot fighting organization versus now, where everybody kind of wears the same thing. Everybody wears the same thing, and of course, UFC, John McCain got a hold of the UFC, tried to ban it, accusing it of calling it human cockpit fighting. So the UFC, they copied other MMA organizations and cooperated more with athletic commissions, put gloves and on the fighter, made mouth guard and cups mandatory. And here is where at first it was a tournament to see what the best style was, but then they saw, of course, like Bruce Lee said, there was no best style. That was no best style. The greatest fighter is a fighter who can adapt to anything. So fighters began to cross train in other styles, and here is where you saw the rise. In the early UFCs, you had fighters like Marco Ruas, Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock, the first fighter to display skills in striking and grappling. Marco Ruas, Ken Shamrock, Keith Keith Hackney, Dan Severn, Don Fry, and Mark Coleman, some of the first wrestlers with who introduced ground and pound to dominate. And of course, in my opinion, overrated fighter Gracie with his jiu-jitsu stuff. Um, these were the early and Tank Abbott, who was just a straight up brawler. But it is mentioned he does have wrestling experience and boxing experience, so he's not just a brawler from the streets like everyone continues like he's marketed to like he was marketed to be. He was also the fighter to introduce the grappling gloves. These were the fighters who dominated the early UFC events, but then when they switched to the rules, you saw the rise of new fighters like Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, and Vitor Belfort. Vitor Belfort, fighters who displayed awesome abilities in striking and grappling. You had Chuck Liddell, karate kickboxer with wrestling experience. Then you have Vitor Belfort, boxer, a boxer and traditional MMA fighter with Brazilian jiu-jitsu experience, training. And then of course you had Randy Couture, a wrestler with boxing and Muay Thai training. And these guys dominated UFC, and from 1993 till 2008, the UFC was awesome. It was awesome all the way up until Brock Lesnar started competing. When Brock Lesnar started competing, this is when he became more popular. When he became more popular mainstream, but it was just terrible. There were no good fights. All fights were boring wrestling and jiu-jitsu fights. Fighters with weak stand up, slow paced action, and um and just overrated. And it's been like that ever since Brock Lesnar had been there. It got a little better when he left, but now it just sucks today with fighters like Ronda Rousey and I don't like John Jones. He's a good fighter, but I don't like John Jones. Um, I think Daniel Cormier was a good fighter on the independent circuit, but not in the UFC. Um, and I don't like the heavyweights like Cain Velasquez, and I don't like the heavyweights like Cain Velasquez and Roy Nelson. Then of course around '97, the Gracies, after they left UFC and went to Japan, and of course they challenged the Mexico Takeda, his dojo, the Takeda dojo, to a MMA fight, and this led to the creation of Pride, which is widely considered to be one of the world premieres. It was the world from '97 to 2007, which is how long it lasted. This was the premier martial arts. This was premier martial arts. The MMA organization. This MMA organization. This entire MMA show made other MMA organizations look and small and insignificant. Small and insignificant. But this organization right here was the best, man. This organization right here was the best. This organization featured fighters from all over the world. Had Linda Hart, I think that's her name, providing over the top wrestling like interests. This organization combined showmanship with athleticism and fighters. They beat the hell out of they beat the hell out of each other's. Fighters were much more intense. Fights were much more fast paced and intense, and so many awesome fighters emerged during this period, such as Kazushi Sakuraba representing the Takeda Dojo, um, Vanderlei Silva representing the Shootbox organization, Mirko Cro Cop from the K1 kickboxing organization, um, um, and of course, Fedor Fedor Emelianenko. This promotion was also home to lots of other exciting fighters like African American Afro African American fighter heavy hitter Gary Gubrich, Carlos Newton, who was known for his Kamehamehas whenever he won a fight. Daijiro Matsui representing the Takeda organization. This guy fight record wasn't the best, but he was a highly exciting fighter. You had this guy hitting drop kicks in matches, and his partner Alexander Otska. You had this guy hitting suplexes and Boston and single leg crabs in matches. The Takeda Dojo guys, these guys were wrestlers. These guys were wrestlers doing what is supposed to be fake moves in a realistic MMA fight. Then you had Kazushi Sakuraba, who the Gracies were widely considered to be unbeatable. You had Kazushi Sakuraba, a professional wrestler, just embarrassing and owning all the Gracies. He beat Royce Gracie, then he beat Renzo Gracie, he beat Rickson Gracie, just owning all the Gracies, man. And then of course you had Nibahiko Takeda, who of course this guy he engaged in a lot of fixed fights in the organization because he was a professional wrestler, but he had lots of exciting battles, including one with a controversial one with Mark Coleman, and of course you had this is where Rampage got his start. I think Rampage is an overrated, mediocre fighter, but he was powerful. He was powerful and he was strong, and you can't call him the worst. He was a he was a powerful wrestler and a strong brawler. Which took him to success and pride and championship goal in the UFC. Um, you had Murillo Rua, and Mauricio Rua, the Rua brothers. The Rua brothers. You had Igor Vovchanchyn, another underrated fighter, Ensign, Tom Erickson, an awesome wrestler. Don Fry, who I'll always love. He looks like Mike Hager from Final Fight. Um, James Thompson, who's another brawler type fighter, wrestler type fighter, but he was highly exciting to watch, unlike most brawler wrestler types. And you had Bob the Beast Sapp, who had an awesome fight with Nogueira, and Antonio Nogueira, another awesome fight. This is him in his prime. He's still here in the UFC, but in the UFC he's a shell of his former self. His UFC career is nowhere as exciting as his Pride career was, and you have Fedor Emelianenko, who from 2000, I think he showed up in 2002 or 3. 2002 or 3, from 2002 till 2010, this guy was undefeated. No one beat him. And this guy became popular without the UFC. And at one point Pride was beating the UFC. They were taking off all their fighters, luring them away with bigger money and a bigger stage to apply their trade on. And of course, this all came to an end in 2007 when they heard that the Yakuza was controlling the organization. According to people in Japan, the Yakuza allegedly controls every every strong business in Japan, and were fixing fights. And Japan abandoned all association, and the Japanese abandoned all association with them, which allowed Pride to be put up for sale, and Dana White acquired Pride in its entire library, and thus right here my opinion, began his mission to kill MMA. I think Dana White has killed MMA. I think he's killed fighting. He's ruined the credibility. He made it mainstream, but he's ruined the credibility of MMA, and it's not all that mainstream. The pay-per-view buys are terrible. So they have to sign people like CM Punk to up the buys, and they still have good ratings, but their pay-per-view buys are just terrible. This organization is a shell of what it was. There's some good fighters like Conor McGregor and Daniel, I think his name is Winchell, something like that. But and Ruthless Robbie Lawler and Dennis Seaver, some of the awesome fighters like that in the lighter divisions. But this organization is just a shell of what it once was, man. And then you have awesome fighters like Anderson Silva, who's now injured. Then you have fighters like GSP, who love GSP, but not in the UFC. I wish he would leave and go somewhere else, like one of the smaller organizations, which, in my opinion, is where the true essence of MMA is lives on. And that's in smaller organizations like Bellator MMA on Spike TV, World Series of Fighting on NBC Sports. Um, what's that other organization called in Japan? One FC or One Championship now, which is what it's called. This is the new big Japanese organization since Pride, and its successor Dream failed, and then of course you got MY Global. I think this was Fedor's promotion in Europe. Then you got what's the other organization called? You got King of the Cage and International Sports Combat Federation and Gladiator Challenge, which these organizations were organizations meant for up and coming fighters and fighters who are old and still looking to fight, who can still fight. Um, so like I said, the true essence of MMA, just like in my opinion, professional wrestling lies in the independent and international promotions. MMA does too in the independent and international MMA promotions. These promotions have much better products and much more exciting fights. Much more exciting fights. Like I said, the only things I don't like about MMA, of course, besides Dana's organization, the current UFC, are, of course, I hate Dana for taking away the outfits, making everyone wear wear trunks, and making everyone wear trunks and short tights. And I hate them for taking away the outfits, and of course all MMA organizations are like this now. With the all organizations are like this now, and I hate them for ruining and so the oh yeah, that and this kind of led to the downfall of one of my favorite martial arts, and that was shoot fighting. So that's some things I don't like about MMA, but MMA is really exciting watch. When it's a really an exciting watch, and both of these are great alternates to the staged professional wrestling, and also great alternates to two of my other favorite martial arts, and that's boxing and kickboxing. All right, Doug out. I'll be talking more about these different organizations. All right, Doug out.